And all right, thank you guys. I hope everybody had a good lunch, good networking session. I was really excited about Elena's talk, even though I've heard it 3 times, because Elena always gives a really amazing talk. And we had some really great questions. It is now my great pleasure and honor to present Saul Griffith, who I was just telling him I'm a little bit of a fanboy. Saul has founded a lot of different things and built a lot of different stuff. Saul is recipient of the MacArthur Genius Fellowship for inventions too numerous to count. He is the founder of Otherlab in San Francisco, which is one of my favorite places to go and find out what crazy things people are building. And the most recent thing that Saul has been working on, which made me really excited to invite him here to speak to you, is that he has been working on a comprehensive map of energy use in the US. And in his own words, he is one of the few people to read every footnote in every energy agency document ever produced, which sounds like a horror show to me, but that's why we have people like Saul to do that kind of work, because he really is that good. His organization, Rewiring America, is promoting an aggressive plan to tackle one of the most fundamental steps in decarbonization, which is electrify almost every aspect of our economy. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Saul. Thank you, Saul.
I have to admit to feeling really awkward with hyperbolic introductions. And I usually just would like to be able to say, hi, this is Saul. But the particular hyperbole here that I have to question is, I've read a lot of footnotes, but let's not say I've read all of the footnotes. If there could be at least one voice of feedback that says, yes, my slides are showing, that'll be great. And I'm going to switch to some slides now. All right, so my day job is running a company called Otherlab, which is an R&D company. Our product is making startups. We've done startups in industrial solar, in rooftop solar, in hydrogen energy, in energy storage, in a whole bunch of interesting places in energy. About 20 years ago, I developed a hobby in energy data, which I think really classifies me as a tragic nerd. I wanted to understand what we knew and why we knew it and when we knew it as regards all our energy system, with a goal of figuring out best pathways for decarbonization. That hobby turned into a night job last year. I founded Rewiring America with Alex Lasky, who was the founder of O-Power. Some of you may know of O-Power. The goal of Rewiring America is to work on the policy, regulatory, and community building required for massive decarbonization on a timeline commensurate with hitting a 1.5 or 2 degree target. So the presentation I'm going to give you here is we've continued to dial down into the details of what decarbonization is really going to look like in terms of gaining political currency. We are gaining a lot by virtue of being able to describe the transformation that is required in the most detail. And so this is a bit of a test experimental deck. So I'm sorry, everyone, if this is not the talk that was advertised, but it's the talk that I want to give today. So indulge me that luxury. And I want to be very specific about the 1 billion machines that need to change in our economy to get to zero carbon and the timeline they need to do it. So I'm going to talk about 1 billion machines or climate change mitigation from the kitchen table out. First point of reference. Many of you may have seen this curve. This is really speaks to the timeline. You're going to hear a lot of people say 2050. 2050, human beings like round numbers, and so 2050 is a nice round number that's far enough out that commitments may not count. 2050 isn't really the right timeline to hit the targets we want. In terms of hitting a 1.5 degree target, which should be our goal, if we start in 2000, we would have had 30 years for each 50% cut. If we started last year, which we didn't really, we had 10 years to cut emissions by 50%. And if we delay it by a few more years, by 2025, we only have months for each 50% cut in emissions to stay on target for 1.5 degree world. The picture is actually slightly worse than that. There is a concept called committed emissions that some of you may have heard of. Committed emissions are the CO2 that will be emitted by a machine that already exists in the economy. So if you bought a gasoline-powered car last year, that car will probably live for 20 years, and it in essence has already committed 20 years worth of emissions. Similarly, if you bought a natural gas furnace tomorrow for your house, even if it was an efficient one, that thing will be burning natural gas for another 15 to 25 years, because that's how long furnaces last. And if you add up the committed emissions of all of the machines, whether they be power plants, household heating appliances, or vehicles, the committed emissions of machines that already exist today take us over the 1.5 degree target and just short of 2 degrees, somewhere in the middle there. That is to underscore the urgency that we need to get to 100% adoption rates of the right technology as soon as possible. So that means rapid, massive industrial mobilization around getting the supply chain up to scale to be able to supply the heat pumps, the electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we need 100% adoption rates. That's now the heroic Herculean wartime level of effort we need to hit the climate targets we should be aiming for our children. I'm going to skip that slide. In 1973, the oil crisis landed on Richard Nixon's desk. We didn't even know how the US economy worked in terms of energy flow. Nixon tapped the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, which was the best group of energy nerd scientists that existed at that time, because the Department of Energy did not exist at that time. And they charged, they'd had a subcommittee and a group go and figure out how to express the energy challenge of the United States. And that committee chose to use a Sankey diagram. The goal was to be able to educate, as I think the quote was, an above average intelligent person in under an hour, the intricacies of the energy economy, by which they meant a senator or a congressperson. And this is the diagram they came up with. It's a flow diagram on the left. These are inputs, so barrels of oil or petroleum, biomass, tons of coal, cubic feet of natural gas, geothermal, nuclear, etc. It goes into electricity and then flows into sectors. Those sectors were somewhat arbitrarily defined at the time: residential, commercial, industrial, transportation. They seem obvious, but I'm going to try and shake your theory of that a little bit. Anyway, the sectors were invented in the 70s. Here is the first one of these flows, and quite honestly, if you took a look at this and the proportions of inputs and outputs and useful and wasted energy, you can say that the only thing that happened between 1970 and 2020 is that we added color to this graph. And so we haven't really made much progress on getting to the change we need. We did a huge study of the United States for the Department of Energy in 2018 to say just how detailed can you make this map. And in fact, you can make it so detailed that your PDF renderer takes a long time to send it over the video conference. I'm sorry about this. So we set ourselves the target of being able to identify any energy flow that is identifiable that's larger than 0.1% of US energy. And you actually start to find some pretty astonishing things. You can actually resolve the 0.6% of energy flow that is driving children to church or school, the 0.2% of energy flow that is used in slaughterhouses to process meat, the 3/4 of 1% of US energy flow, which is using natural gas to pump natural gas through 4.4 million miles of pipeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't pretend that we're going to dive in detail here into this giant picture, but you can find it online, and you can regale yourself with all the detail, and maybe people can ask me questions later. Once you've got to that nice detailed picture of the US, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the screen sharing software is spinning wheels for me. So hang on a second. This is embarrassing. All right. Anyway, that is to say, it's complicated for experts, let alone citizens, the energy flows of the US. And my daughter actually colored in my slides for this presentation, as you'll see here. So to go from the highly technical, I think what we're really trying to do at Rewiring America is demystify climate change actions. You know, I'm sure you were all frustrated at the end of Al Gore's movie that the suggestion for what to do was, you know, change your light bulbs and buy a stainless steel cup. We'd like to get really specific. And people think in terms of their households. And actually, your household, if you include the garage and the cars attached to it, is really connected to all sectors. So there's residential sector, which comprises a lot of electricity, comes into the household. Some industry comes in, for example, through that energy required to get the natural gas to your household. The energy, you know, roughly 15 or 20% of the energy in gasoline was oil used in industry to create the gasoline for you. So in fact, that's why there's a link to your cars there from industry. So it's a much, this is a more honest assessment of the things that happen in our houses. In fact, about 42% of all of our emissions are decisions that you make in your house. Our small businesses and commercial sector has similar loads to our homes. So it's lighting loads, it's heating loads, and it's vehicles attached to businesses. And if you included those businesses, what's called the commercial sector as well, that's 65% of our emissions in total, along with households, and all of our energy related emissions are 85%. So it's closer to 75% of all of our energy related emissions are things that happen in and around our buildings. The only real pathway we know to decarbonize all of these emissions is through electrification. That's electrification of vehicles, it's electrification of the heating and the cooking loads, and some of that will be supplied by solar cells. So that's the picture we're showing you here. But let's look in more detail at the individual US household. So there's 121 million households in the US. They have an average of 2.6 people in each of them. There's, sort of astonishing to me, nearly 2 cars in every garage. I tried to draw 1.88 of a car, this one here. It's sort of like a car with the wing mirrors cut off. But even our homes aren't all the same. We have in the US, of the 121 million, 74 million are the canonical American suburbs, single-family detached homes. 7 million people live in row houses. These are called single-family attached. This is, for example, most of the homes within San Francisco. About 10 million people live in 2 to 4 unit multifamily. That's very typical, for example, development patterns in Florida. 20 odd million live in 5+ unit multifamily. This is a bigger city, and still quite a large number of people, 7 million families live in mobile homes less. Very important to think about the demographics of this transition in terms of the technologies required in these different homes and how you're going to get deployed. Our homes may be very different shapes and sizes, and are expanding different by household, but we enjoy surprisingly similar things and energy uses. So this is from a report we wrote last year about household energy costs and what we stand to save in terms of money. But this is the baseline. So this is the picture today. This is the existing energy costs per households by state. The blue is gasoline or diesel. Red is natural gas expenditures in dollars. Yellow is electricity expenditures in dollars. The light green is propane. So there's still a number of homes in the US that use propane for heat. And the dark green is fuel oil. So typically in the Northeast, people still use fuel oil. That's basically burning diesel to heat your home. And the expenditures per house span from somewhere from $3,000 to almost $7,000 per household in terms of what we spend on energy. This might shock Bay Area people, but this is the average home in the US. This is a tree map of household expenditures. So the after-tax annual expenditures of the average US home is $61,000. Think about that. The median is even lower, close to $50,000. Of that $60,000 in average expenditures per household, $2,000 is spent on gasoline, which is more than we spend on fresh fruit and fresh meat in that household. Average home spends $1,500 on electricity, which is more than we spend on education in that average household. $400 for natural gas, $100 for fuel oils, which is more than we spend on dentistry. So the energy expenditures are substantial to the majority and meaningful to the majority of homes in the US, but oddly are sort of meaningless to the people who can currently afford the decarbonization solutions. So what do the loads actually look like? We all do fairly similar things, and it's TVs, it's lighting, it's water heating, it's air conditioning, it's transportation, it's space heat, cooking, refrigeration, computers, washers and dryers, and other. The big loads of these are the space heating, it's 20 to 30%, the water heating about 10%. Clothes dryers can be a big load, cooking can be a big load, and we're going to now look at what do we need to do within the US economy to get to eliminate all of the emissions. We must electrify all of those things. And what does that look like? So the Residential Energy Consumption Survey that's done in partnership with the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives you this. We have 250 million cars and trucks. That means, passenger cars and light trucks parked in our driveways. We have 70 million furnaces in our basements, 63 million natural gas powered water heaters, 41 million natural gas cooking ranges, nearly 20 million natural gas dryers, 7.5 million natural gas cooktops, 1.8 million natural gas wall ovens, 70 million grills, 2 million natural gas fired hot tubs, and 1.5 million natural gas heated swimming pools. The top 5 are the very important ones. That's the great majority of the loads. The bottom ones I just list for completeness. So those are the 550 million fossil fueled machines that exist in the economy today that when they end their life need to be replaced by a zero carbon, most likely, almost certainly electrified solution if we stay on target. And that's how we get transition of the whole economy in roughly 20 years. But to support that, we need critical infrastructure that doesn't exist yet in the home. This, some of you will recognize, some of you will just say it's a bad drawing. This is a load center or breaker box. This is the electrical circuit probably in your garage or in your basement that connects your home to the grid. We already know that in 50% of homes that upgrade to solar in the US, they need an upgrade of this piece of infrastructure as well. That'll be closer to 100% because they'll need to carry more current and do it in smarter ways when we add electric vehicles and electric heat as well as rooftop solar to all of our homes. Similarly, not only do we need to put in 100 million load centers in our homes, we probably need to put 150 million vehicle chargers in. Only 40% of vehicles that go to sleep at night park within 20 feet of a electrical outlet. So if we are going to have a wholesale electrification of passenger transport, We'll need an awful lot of these vehicle chargers. I'm actually dialing in from just south of Sydney in Australia today. That's where we're sending our kids to school during the pandemic. In Australia, rooftop solar has been an enormous success story. The Australian government did some reasonably clever hacks around regulatory issues and certification and training, and rooftop solar installs for $1 a watt. That's about 1/3 of the capital cost of it being installed in the United States. That amounts to an electricity price of 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour, levelized cost of electricity. To put that in perspective, the average cost of electricity from the grid in the United States is 13.8 cents, and the cost of transmission and distribution alone in the US is around 8 cents. So even if you could produce fusion energy for free, it would cost you 8 cents by the time it got to your home in the US, which is more expensive than rooftop solar in Australia. This is why we're very strong advocates for rooftop solar everywhere. So we're going to need 80 million of those systems, and we'll probably need 100 million home batteries of various shapes and sizes to balance all of these loads. So there's another 430 million machines. So there's a billion machines. I understand a lot of you in the audience are or aspire to be tech entrepreneurs. There's an awful lot of revenue in a billion machines. So let's get to work. To emphasize once more the pace at which this needs to happen, we need to get these machines deployed to 100% market penetration in 20 years. That means if you look at historical adoption rates, we need to deploy this at the speed with which the cell phone and the color television were deployed across the society. They both took about 20 years to get to nearly 100% market penetration. Just as a reminder, these are the average ages of the various machines that we're talking about. The average car or light truck will live for 20 to 25 years, the average furnace for 15 to 20, the average gas water heater for 8 to 12, electric water heaters 10 to 15. You can read the rest of the numbers here. The point I'd really like to emphasize here is the message from the environmentalist movement for the last, really since Earth Day in 1970, has been, make all of these little consumer decisions and you'll figure out your life. I think what this slide really emphasizes is that you should start to think of a small number of decisions that you make every 10 or 20 years as the infrastructure of your life. And what we need to do, if you really want to decarbonize, stop sweating the Dolphin Safe tuna versus the other can of tuna on the shelf, and start sweating now. What am I going to do when I have to replace my furnace in my home? What am I going to do when I need a new vehicle? And if we could make those half dozen infrastructure decisions really well for our homes and households, then decarbonizing becomes easy. It's sort of back of mind. But what we really critically need to do is make sure that we have the technologies and we have the sales methods, etc., to intervene every time anyone needs to replace or wants to upgrade these machines in their lives. I'm just going to say, what can we win if we do this well? So I'm going to switch to another presentation that we made. This looks at potential savings that can be made by electrifying American households. So once again, this looks at the existing household, 1.88 cars, natural gas hot water heater, heating oil and natural gas furnace, natural gas or propane for cooking, and some electricity. So that's the home as it stands today. We need to get to here. Heat pump space heat pump water heater, a battery in your garage, a load center upgrade, 2 electric vehicles, 2 fast chargers. We can look at this. So in kilowatt hour equivalents, we converted all of the existing energy loads in the house into kilowatt hour equivalents, and here they are on top. So the driving is in purple. like orange is space heat, yellow is water heat, other heat is cooking, electrical non-heat is all of the other electrical loads, that's green. And the big black bar is the electric losses that don't occur within your house. That's the energy used or the energy wasted in generating your electricity on the grid. So about only 38% of the fuel that we put into the generation machines that we have on the grid turns into electricity delivered to your home. The other 62-ish% is wasted. So here's an astonishing story. The picture on the bottom is what happens once we've electrified our households. So the driving, when you electrify a vehicle, that electric car, if it's the same size, same weight, same load carrying capacity, etc., it uses 1/4 to 1/3 of the energy of the gasoline equivalent. If you eliminate the thermoelectric losses from the grid, that's the big black bar, because instead of using coal and natural gas to make electricity, we're using solar or wind or nuclear, then those losses go away. If we use electric heat pumps, they typically use 1/3 of the energy of natural gas heating systems to heat your water or your space heat. So the total energy used by your household reduces by close to 4x, as you can see there. That's for every single state, so you can see the variations by state. Here's the average. So we get this giant win by electrification. Again, I just want to point out that the unfortunate coincidence of Earth Day in 1970 and then the oil crisis in 1973 is that once those boffins did the study for Nixon on what the problem was, they identified it as a supply side problem. We weren't getting the oil. It was about 15% of our energy supply. And the solution to the oil crisis was to make cars more efficient, and that gave us CAFE fuel standards, literally, and to make homes more efficient, which gave us Energy Star and appliance standards. It also, the environmentalist movement after the success of Earth Day was looking for something, a story to back. And so this idea then that we could save America and we could save the environment with efficiency was born. And we've had a dialogue about efficiency ever since. That what this slide is really emphasizing is, well, what I really want you to have emphasized here is that you can't efficiency your way to zero carbon. If we have another decade of slightly more efficient natural gas ovens installed and slightly more efficient gasoline-powered cars, we just don't hit our climate targets. The big efficiency win is electrification, and we just need to hammer that home everywhere. And that's why you need to electrify anything. There's this giant win. You can model out the cost per home, which we've the energy cost. We already mentioned the energy costs, but you can also model out the cost of household upgrades. So if I am to replace the two vehicles in the driveway with equivalent electric vehicles, how much extra money do I have to spend? If I replace the natural gas hot water heater with a heat pump water heater, how much extra money do I have to spend? So we look at the capital cost of upgrade for homes, and this is for today with existing costs of electric vehicles, existing costs of these upgrades. We actually modeled it for 3 scenarios. Business as usual, so that's the cost today. Good scenario, so really the good scenario is what happens when America almost gets to the cost of rooftop solar in Australia. What happens when battery costs, which are actually we're already ahead of schedule, are probably close to $120 a kilowatt hour now. They're predicted to get to $75 a kilowatt hour by 2024, 2025. And when the heat pump coefficient of performance increases, and then we also model in an interest rate. And I'll talk about the interest rate in a second. So we're on these technology learning rates. Obviously, solar has come down enormously. Just for reference, $3 a watt installed on your roof for American Solar. The modules themselves cost 26 cents per watt. So that is to emphasize that the majority of costs in most of our energy systems are regulatory hurdles. Things like building codes, national electrical codes, permitting, inspection, and contractor overhead, because most of these installations are custom home additions, more so than appliances. Anyway, costs are falling massively. What happens is, if we look at the this is how the capital cost of those upgrades should go down if we instituted sort of a national level of effort of getting industry to scale. That's responsible for about a third of the cost reductions. Eliminating the regulatory burden gets rid of about another third, and then technology improvements further. So you can see that it goes from being about $80,000 a household upgrade today to about $30,000, which is achievable probably by 2025, to about $15,000 by maybe 2028. And then the reason I encode interest rate is because I think nearly 50% of American homes only have, I think it's $400 to $800 in cash on hand. So the reality is all of these goodies are going to be financed. There's precedent for that. In the Great Depression, the reason most people lost their homes is because the modern mortgage had not yet been invented. Most people had balloon mortgages that they had to pay every 5 years and renegotiate. The stock market crash happened. A lot of people lost their homes. Seeking methods to put money back into the US economy, Roosevelt invented Fannie Mae, which was the federal government guaranteeing local banks to provide financing to get money out into the local economies to start building again. And that was somewhat successful in creating jobs, and that started the re-employment from the Great Depression. But more critically, it was a declaration that the US suburbs were infrastructure that qualified for infrastructure quality financing. In fact, it's the lowest cost of financing and largest capital pool in the world still today is the US mortgage market. So why do I tell you that? That means there's precedent for figuring out a way to finance households to achieve a societal goal like home ownership. And we're going to need that financing to be lowest possible cost, because the interest payments could be substantial. So over here on the left, this is the average, the current expenditure on energy within the US household. Business as usual, this is what would happen if you went out and spent $80,000 to get those 2 electric car upgrades, et cetera. You'll still have to pay some energy to the grid. You'll have to spend a lot of principal, and you'll have to pay a lot of interest, and the payments will end up being about $9,500 a year. So right now it's a losing proposition. If we get to the good scenario of costs and we lower the interest rate, it'll be $1,000 savings per home. And if we get to great, it'll be about $2,500 savings per home. So this is what we have to win. And I want you to think about those savings of $1,000 or $2,500 per US household. If you're in a household, the median household of $50,000 a year, that looks important, but it really emphasizes the financing challenge. We need to figure out how to finance not just the wealthiest 10% of homes who can largely already afford this. We need to figure out how to get the other 90% of homes electrified and decarbonized and saving money and improving their household economics. And this is really a fuels versus financing debate, right? So the reason we buy fossil fuel machines is they're cheaper up front, even though we spend more on fuel through their lifetime. So we need to solve this financing question. It's central to getting the whole country and the whole world decarbonized. I think I will end there. And hopefully there's lots of fun questions. And I've got at least 10 presentations up with backup slides. So hopefully I can cover whatever ground anyone's interested in. Maybe I just talked into a vacuum and there is no one there anymore. What is going on?
All right. Hi, Saul. Sorry about that.
Sure, I think I just called it live because I didn't know whether I had just spoken for an hour to an empty room.
Nope, you're good. You've been talking. We've been hearing you. All right. We have a few questions from our listeners. So what do you think? We have a question from Andy. What do you think about people who live in cities with apartment buildings who can't do rooftop?
Well, you've already stated the problem. We won't get rooftop solar. When we did that study, the really positive household economics, and this is counterintuitive because, again, the environmentalist movement has had a narrative that living in cities is the best environmentally and footprint-wise. But strangely, the suburbs seem to be optimized in terms of solving climate change because the increase in the amount of electricity we need to deliver to each home to electrify the heat and the vehicles can be met with rooftop solar that can be built in those homes. If you get to the Australian cost of solar, that is critical to realizing the positive economics that I stated there. And then the critical question is, well, what about people who don't have a large rooftop? The economics are still positive. They're just not as positive is the headline. We should be looking at as much community solar as we can. I'd really like to emphasize that industrial solar, I have an industrial solar company. We bid projects at effectively 20-year contracts at 2 to 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. I've also worked a lot in the wind industry where 20, 25-year contracts are now 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. It is amazing to me that the cost of the distribution network is 8 cents, is much, much higher than the cost of generation. What this really emphasizes, one, is there's opportunity for, I'm going to answer 3 questions in response to your one question. It emphasizes the need for innovation in the distribution network to lower those costs. But what it really tells you is energy, particularly solar energy generated close to where people live, is very, very likely going to be the cheapest energy on the future grid. And so if it's not going to be on your own rooftop, community solar, when it's on industrial and commercial buildings in your neighborhood, perhaps over the top of parking spaces, could be a part of lowering the total cost of the grid. So I think, it won't be provided by rooftop. In fact, it won't be, the average American home can't supply all of the energy needs under its roof from its rooftop. It will be about 50-50 mix, even for very big installations on rooftops. So the grid doesn't go away. I'm not trying to sell you a hippie vision of completely distributed energy system. We still need the grid. We still need to make the grid cheaper to make sure that the economics work for everyone. I think the bigger question about those urban high people density areas is the home ownership structures aren't the same. So the financing and deployment questions become more complicated. How do we provide incentives for landlords, developers and building owners to also sign up for electrification of the variety we've discussed here? Which I don't have an answer to that question.
Right.
Well, giving you Andy, your question was great, Andy, and there's another even harder question that I'm also not going to answer in response to you.
Yeah, to kind of expand on that, we have a question from Matt about asking how you feel about the role of individuals' decisions versus regulatory action to move the needle on making household purchases more carbon friendly.
I really don't want people to think that I'm an advocate for consumers and individual decision making getting the job done. The narrative arc of this story was to say that real human beings think about energy in terms of their household and things that they do in their household, right? I drive my kids to school. We all eat. We get cold in the winter. We like air conditioning in the summer. That's how, real people, not energy nerds, think about, that's their relationship with energy. So that gave you this narrative and this picture of like, oh, okay, well, the future is going to be okay. It's not really going to be that different to what it is now. I'm just going to have these electric machines. So that was the purpose of that narrative. But in no way can we get to, you don't get to 100% adoption rates with people, I read the headline this morning, only 50% of Republican men are going to get a vaccine. We're not going to have individual consumer choice solve climate change on the time frame required, particularly given what I mentioned about committed emissions and the changeover in machinery we need. So it absolutely has to go hand in hand with regulation. But I want to emphasize that a lot of that is actually unregulation. So fixing the building codes that currently limit the size of the solar that can go on your roof, eliminating the National Electrical Code and building code standards that artificially increase the costs of wiring an induction cook stove into your house or putting a battery on the side of the house. It turns out these soft costs dominate. To give you an example, a totally excellent induction cook stove and oven is maybe a $1,200 appliance. In most homes today, it will cost you $2,500 to run a dedicated 240 volt circuit from your load center to that. So that it's in these peripheral and soft costs where a huge portion of the cost of this whole system is, and that there is an enormous opportunity for cleaning up. We have 120 years of regulations that were written for fossil fuel powered households. We now need to get rid of a lot of those so that we can do cost optimization in a regulatory sense. Additionally, we probably need regulations like are happening in Berkeley and other towns where we're trying to eliminate natural gas connections from homes. So we need all manner of regulatory reform to cost optimize this project for the country. If we multiplied those $2,500 household savings by all of the homes, it's like 500 or $300+ billion a year. This saves money for the economy if we do it correctly. It should, the Green New Deal was stillborn on the narrative of its announcement, which was it's going to cost $20 trillion. No one said it's going to save you $2,500 a year and save the country $500 billion a year. That's how we should be and could be expressing the opportunity for fixing climate change. So far this morning, I feel like I'm really good at answering another question other than the one that was asked.
It's actually I feel like you're answering the next questions that I have. So I think you're covering what most people are interested in. Yeah, because we have questions about from sorry if I mispronounced this, but Avishai asking where is the government in terms of supporting these incentives?
The government hasn't tipped its hand yet. I think we have an astounding team of people joining the administration in the White House on climate. So the choices for the head of Department of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, are excellent. I think the team looks really good. I think the government wants to be ambitious. I hope they want to be more ambitious than Paris, because Paris is not good enough in terms of the climate commitment. I can't say everything that I know because we're talking to a lot of these people, but I can say I am worried that we will fall a little bit short of the level of ambition required, and that will once again be blamed on political expediency and what you can get done. So the tragedy once again is, our politics are not compatible with the task at hand, it seems. So we need to fix politics as well.
Yeah, and to touch and expand on that, Rahim is asking, how do these factors and scenarios translate to other parts of the world, so not just wealthy countries? So how does the electrification approach still apply for low and middle income emerging markets?
So curiously, because of the low cost of rooftop solar, Australia will be the first country, could be, I mean, we're screwing it up in our own regulatory ways. Australia could be the first country in the world to have positive household economics and completely decarbonized people. But very strong natural gas industry lobbies here and ties to coal are screwing that up. Parts of America are probably the next best place in the world economically in terms of large countries. Curiously, a lot of much smaller countries, particularly tropical countries, the economics are already there today because in the large part, your solar energy is competing with diesel. The effective cost of diesel or gasoline is maybe 40 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you can produce solar at 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour, it's a slam dunk. The challenge in all countries in the world, once again, is the capital cost of upgrades. So, you know, an electric motorbike would be, you know, the family car in Kenya is a 150cc motorbike that you put your partner and your 2 or 3 kids on. The, you know, retail petrol or gasoline in Kenya is double or triple the price it is in the US. So an electric motorcycle absolutely makes sense, but you need the capital isn't there and the financing isn't there to yet finance those upgrade vehicles. So I think the world over, we need new payment methods and financing schemes to do this, to solve the capex problem of, you know, batteries, solar, and the electrification solutions. They're all going to be cheaper to run in the long run, but we just got to figure out how to help people afford them.
Yeah. And then we have a question from Elena saying, we've been hearing a lot about heat pumps for heat electrification, but HVAC specialists are still telling consumers that a heat pump needs a backup fossil system, even in California. So how do we get the information on electrification out to all the folks on the ground?
Well, one person at a time is the answer to the how do you get people the information out on the ground. If you looked at the economy and you said, what are we missing? We're missing 1 million electricians and we're missing 1 million HVAC technicians. To deploy what I've sort of outlined grossly in these presentations today, the key missing person in the people in the US economy are not tech nerds. It's electrical and HVAC contractors, and we need training programs and incentives for them to do heat pumps. The reason they think you need to have fossil backup is for very high ramp up loads. So you get home after a weekend away, you've turned all the heat off in your house. You would heat pumps typically, although they can easily do the heat of your house at steady state, they're slower to ramp up. So the HVAC technician, which is concerned that you come back to them because you have a good user experience with their HVAC system, recommends natural gas backup so that you have it virtually instant on. So that is the prevailing methodology and the prevailing set of technologies and the prevailing workforce that we have in HVAC are still making those recommendations. Whereas, we can put thermal storage in these systems and use that to do the ramp up. There's the technical solutions now exist, but the sad reality is that they're not at scale. They're not yet economic, and in fact, the cheapest fuel in the United States is natural gas used for heat. And so it's a slam dunk for electric vehicles using 6 cent solar or even 20 cent solar against 40 cents equivalent gasoline. But you need to be really at 5 cents an hour with high efficiency heat pumps to beat natural gas cost. So not only is the technologies aren't all quite there and in place and easy and user experiences, not only is the contract work not developed and trained and you know, processed for that. Let's very specific. The worst agent in the remaining climate war is the natural gas industry and its lobbying groups that is going to come out and say, can't do their line of attack. Biden administration, anyone who promotes any vision like I've just said will be, well, you're going to charge people more for heat, because today that is true. Natural gas to the solution for your home. Where if we focus on reducing regulatory and soft costs, if we focus on all of these other, we'll get electricity cheap enough and heat pumps efficient enough that we will beat natural gas. But that sadly is only true in a small number of zip codes today. So I think the question is fantastic. Like, use the wedge for both action on climate, sadly.
Okay, thank you. And we are just wrapping up. It seems like we have a little bit of technical difficulties on your end for the video right now, but we are wrapping up anyway. So I wanted to ask one final question. A lot of our attendees right now are, just getting into climate tech, and it seems like a lot of the questions that we had in the chat that we weren't able to get to have a lot of focus on the individual action. Is there any last final statements that you want to say about what the individual can do, especially if someone who is looking to transition into the field of climate tech?
I'm going to interpret the question as as young, motivated, technical people, what can you personally do career-wise, not well, go out and buy an electric car, never buy anything that's run on natural gas again. That's the easy answer. But career-wise, there's unfortunately, there's not enough climate tech companies existing to absorb the number of, by my personal experience, to absorb the number of people who want a job. I see 50 to 100 resumes for every one person we can afford to hire in climate. There's just not enough funded companies doing enough yet to do it. And I think that's because there's still a huge technology focus. Someone will build the Amazon for household decarbonization, which feels like a one-click experience that, someone in America you will take out all of the you'll make it happen. So I'd like to encourage you that as much as you're working for sexy startups, start thinking about joining the startups that are going to solve the financing problem, startups that are going to solve the logistics and the permitting and the soft cost problem. If those startups don't exist, then today is the day to start them. And I'm sorry, it's probably my son that is causing the technical problems.
Yeah, it's getting a little fuzzy, but I think we're able to get the gist of it, and really appreciate you speaking today, and thank you so much. We're gonna take a quick break now and hear from our next speaker in about 5 minutes. So thank you again, Saul, and we'll see you all back here on the stage soon.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank
Ignore
you.
my hot mic moment that happened earlier.
You're good.